Hey, what's up? Hello. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt, and we are here with two guests today. First, we have our very common recurring guest, Arnaud, and we also have someone new. And before I introduce our someone new guest here, you're going to notice from the title that this is a video about Anatomy of a Fall, but it's a little bit different than normal. This is not a review of Anatomy of a Fall. This is a discussion about some of the legal elements. Should go without saying, there's going to be a lot of spoilers here. We are going to talk about everything in this film. For the record, I did like Anatomy, but I didn't quite find the trial scenes to be all that believable. And here to prove me wrong is Arnaud's friend, Léo-Paul. Welcome. How are you?
Hello, Matt. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm really happy to discuss about this film. That's a film that I enjoyed, but we will talk about much more after.
Now, Leo, you're here as not only a French consultant, you're also a legal consultant for us. So could you just give us a little bit of background on yourself? What's your relationship to law and to cinema?
I studied law in France. I did basically 5 years law course in France, especially in criminal law, which and the film is talking about criminal trial, a murder. I just recently passed the bar school there, so I'm not a certified lawyer yet, but soon I just have to complete an internship. So that's my, I would say, law background, my kind of expertise. I mean, I'm not a lawyer in France, and I wouldn't talk as a lawyer, as a certified lawyer there, but I have a law perspective on this film. And concerning the cinema part, I would say that I'm a real movie lover. I would say an amateur or a connoisseur, but not maybe not a cinephile, you know, not as my friend Arnaud here.
Oh, you're too kind. I would consider you a cinephile.
So thank you, I appreciate.
So before we get deeper into the legal elements of the film, which you are going to be so helpful in talking about here, what were your general thoughts on the film just as a movie?
I would say first that I enjoyed this film, but maybe it's a bias because I have a low perspective, but I'm not super hyped about this one. You know, I when I finished the film, I liked it. It was a great moment, but I wouldn't say that I saw a great film, the one that you remember. I would say yes, it's an important movie, and especially because and you will prosecute this film, but I think it's quite true. You know, it's close from the reality of a real trial in France.
I'd heard that Justine Triet was very inspired by the Amanda Knox case. Do you know about that case? And do you see any? No, you don't. Okay, we can skip this question.
No, I don't know. I don't know this one.
Arnaud, you mentioned the Amanda Knox case, but Leo, are you familiar at all with the Michael Peterson case?
No.
I believe this happened in France or Germany. It was turned into a miniseries, someone who was accused of pushing their spouse down a staircase. And it was exactly like Anatomy of a Fall. I recommend looking into this case because this happened. It was a French documentary miniseries that came out in 2001. It came out shortly after his arrest in 2001, but I don't know all the specifics about that case, so I'm going to kind of dodge around that one. And I'll just say that for me, as someone who was a little bit skeptical of the trial elements in the film, the largest thing that I found a little bit hard to believe here was that a case with so little evidence, truly the only actual evidence that was presented in this beyond theories was one recording that was recorded on a different day. I had a hard time believing that a case like this would even go to trial. So what is the process typically like for a case with so little evidence? And would something like this get to trial, in your opinion?
Honestly, it depends of the case and the prosecutor, especially who is dealing with the case. Most of the times, if the prosecutor doesn't have any evidences, he will not push for this case. But sometimes there are media pressures, political pressure. That's just important, you know, if somebody was found dead, maybe murdered, the public will speak about it. That's it, you know, the people in this little town, some people would like to have a sort of judicial answer, even if there are not much evidences. I mean, we try to find justice, but the humans are doing this justice, and that's not the best thing.
In your opinion, with as much evidence as there was here, do you think it was right to go to trial?
Honestly, on the case of the film, it's not right to go for a trial with so little evidences, you know. It's also a lawyer perspective, you know. Maybe a political or prosecutor perspective would say, yes, we need to prosecute, we need to find the truth behind it. But when I would say when you are a lawyer, and especially people who are acting as defense lawyers, they will say, no, we will not put a man in front of the crowd, a woman in the case of the film.
I suppose to defend the film and that choice, perhaps the reason why they did feel pressured to go to the trial is because she is, in a way, a public figure. She is an author. She is a known person, and potentially there's that public interest in her life. But to me, it still feels a little bit weird that with one recording, they found that to be sufficient evidence to go to trial.
I would say that in this film, and especially in this case, there are some small evidences that could show that the murderer is the wife. This guy was not known by his family as somebody that could suicide himself. He was not known as someone who was desperate. The policemen, the investigators, they will try to find the reasons, and they found some small evidences. That's true, as you said. Sometimes when the local newspapers, they will talk about this. Maybe also the TV, they will talk about this. There will be some whispers in the crowd, say, maybe this wife, she killed her husband. And you know, a lot of people will start to do I would say expectations. They will create stories, and that's the case of a murder, because everybody will in the local town, they will talk about this during the dinner or the lunch, and we say, do you think she killed her husband? Yes, no, and nobody knows the file. Nobody knows the evidences, but everyone has something to say about the case. I have a funny story about this. In the 80s in France, there was a famous case which was called the death of Gregory, which was a child found dead in a river in France, and it was a huge case. They tried to find who killed this little boy, and nobody saw who was the killer. And today, as I'm speaking right now, we still don't know who killed this little boy. During the 80s, there was a famous, they started to accuse the mother of the child. There were like no evidences. It was close from no evidences that she killed her child. I remember when I saw a documentary about that there was a famous writer, Marguerite Duras. She wrote an article in a national newspaper, and she said, she said things like, I don't remember the exact word, but she said, like, I see the demon in the eyes of this woman. I'm sure that she killed her boy, and she represents all the women in the world, all our sisters, and you know, she made of her a sort of a dark feminist figure. It was a weird thing, close from the paranormal, no evidences. And a lot of people love this type of things. It's really rooted in the people. You know, they want to see the blood. They want the justice, and
there's a zeitgeist.
Even though they don't have any evidences.
Obviously, in a trial, the burden of proof should be on the prosecution to prove that the defendant is guilty and not the other way around. But a lot of the time through this film, it really feels like the defense is the one that has to prove something. The entire time in this trial, it's as though Sandra is guilty until proven innocent, rather than the opposite. I think back to the scene where the prosecution cross-examines the expert who brings in the theory of the blunt force trauma and the fall. And the way that they speak to that expert, they're putting forward his theory of what might have happened as fact. And when it comes around the other way, suddenly it's, well, can you prove that she didn't hit him over the head?
So the burden of the proof, it's a low tool, you know. That's, I mean, you have to, the prosecutor must show on a low perspective that the person is guilty, especially for a criminal case. You're in front of a court made of professional justices, but also people from the street, which are not professional justices. And even if the prosecutor has the burden of the proof, the lawyers, they will go as far as they can in their work. They will try to do more and more to prove that their client didn't do anything. So they will push their theory, even if it's not their role. Even if they don't have to do that, they will do that to show that all the other theories cannot explain the case and the death of the husband.
Now, they do remark in the film that it's very odd for the judge to allow the only witness in the case to continue living with the defendant. Obviously, there's a story reason for this, as it would be pretty psychologically damaging for this child to be separated from his mother right after losing his father. But I can't imagine a scenario like this playing out in real life. Do you know if there's any precedent for something like this to take place?
That's weird because, you know, the only thing in this film that is quite, I would say, unrealistic on the law perspective is the social worker who lives in the house with the family. I would say that it would be more realistic if the boy lived with his mother and as she was accused, and he could testify about it. That's a bit weird, but it's more realistic. On this film, there was a lawyer, was a consultant, and I read his interview. He said that thing was not realistic at all. There is no you cannot put just a social worker during one trial with a boy who lives with the mother who is accused. It's not possible, but that could be something interesting to install in the French system. That's a good idea for the justice, but technically it's not real.
That's so interesting, because I would think that they would just absolutely not allow the only witness in the case to continue living with the defendant. But it's interesting to hear that the thing that's not realistic is the barrier they put up to ensure that there was no tampering with the witness.
The character Marge is her name. She's a really interesting character because she has the role of being this barrier. Also, there's a bit of a language component to it. She only speaks French, therefore everybody has to speak French in the house for her to understand, to make sure that there is no influence going on. There's a very key kind of part in the third act of the film, which I think is kind of the key to understanding the film, and, you know, realism or not, I think is a kind of beautiful moment where she's playing with Daniel in the snow, and she essentially tells him, you have to kind of decide for yourself what you think the truth is. Without that character, you wouldn't have that scene. But then it's kind of now that I learned that it's unrealistic, you know, it's kind of having to separate. Okay, well, where does realism end and cinema take over?
I do believe that in many countries around the world, blood splatter analysis is not admissible as evidence in court. Is it admissible in France? I believe that in Canada, in the United States, blood splatter is not a form of evidence. I did some reading on this after. My understanding is that using the pattern of blood. It's more circumstantial than anything, and it's a very imperfect science.
I would say that in France, I think they would accept this. I'm not sure, and maybe also
not 100.
maybe also in Canada. So it's just technically it's admissible in court, but the judge will analyze, with a balance and say if he believes in it or he doesn't believe in it.
Speaking of which, there was one moment I really appreciated that the judge did call out the prosecution and challenge them on the use of Sandra's books as evidence. I don't know about France, but I believe that in the United States, it's been ruled that except for extreme cases, you cannot use art, and specifically with rap lyrics, you cannot use rap lyrics that are violent as proof that someone has violent tendencies, because it is a form of storytelling. So the use of her books here, would this be evidence that would be admissible in France?
I would say that it's accepted,
Okay.
to understand maybe not as an evidence of the murder. I think a judge, whether in France or in Canada, would never make someone guilty just based on this on the evidence of a book. I hope so, but it can be accepted as a part of the psychological analysis to understand with the person the book that someone could write. I think it should be accepted. I mean, accepted to talk about it in the court, and also some books that other people wrote about the case can be accepted as a testimony, and the writers can be interrogated about this. I remember that in a famous case in France about terrorism, defense lawyers were criticizing the fact that the civil parties invited writers of books specialized on terrorism to just ask them what they thought about the case, and it didn't bring a lot of interesting information on the case specifically.
Something that was a cinematically strong choice, and yet left me wondering if this would hold up in court, was Daniel's final argument. He gets up on the stand, and it's this emotional monologue that he gives where he starts talking about how his dad told him a story about his dog and about how his dog isn't going to live forever. And then he spins it and says that he believes that his dad was talking about himself and not about the dog at all. It was hard to believe as this being accepted as a testimony, as a piece of evidence, because he'd already proven to be an unreliable witness with a poor memory, because he had already changed the tune of his initial testimony when challenged on it. And now over a year later, he's suddenly recalling this random, unconnected conversation, which has no substance or evidence to it other than a subjective interpretation. And it's also shaky to believe that he could fully remember all the details of this conversation so specifically, word for word. So I wonder if you think that this type of testimony should be permitted in court.
It should be permitted. It will be criticized by the person who opposes this testimony, especially the prosecutor in the film. But sometimes there are some really weird testimonies. I remember a famous lawyer in France who the prosecutor wanted to interrogate, how do you say that, the dog a dog in a case, just asking, showing him some music, and maybe he will bark one time or two times, and then we will be able to interpret it, this as the person killed or didn't kill. There are some really weird things, and
I think this was taken in Justine Triet's previous film, In Bed with Victoria, with Virginie Efira. There's a trial scene where they bring in a dog and they try to see if it's going to bark, if I remember correctly, bark multiple times to try to prove if there was an attack. So I think it was inspired by that. Yeah,
it's permitted in front of the court, but for sure it will be criticized. A good lawyer will say, what is that? you cannot rely on this in order to just put this guy in jail, put this person in jail.
Right.
Concerning the testimony of a child, it participates to the evidence. So you can accept the testimony of a child. I know that in Canada, for example, you can hear the testimony of a child, but if the only evidence is the testimony of a child who is not able to, how do you say, to take an oath, you cannot put the person in jail. You cannot find someone guilty.
Part of it is we didn't see the prosecution cross-examine Daniel at that point, because the cinematic moment is most powerful when he gives the monologue and then we cut to the verdict of the case. So it is very possible that evidence was challenged as like this kid doesn't know what he's talking about.
There are clear editing decisions as to like what Justine Triet omits and what she decides to add into the film. And here, obviously, we omit a large part. We omit the final, what you call it, the final verdict. So, you know, there are big parts that she omits in trying to make her point and whatnot. So yeah, you're saying there could have been room between those two scenes that would have shown the trial evolve further.
I suppose Triet's point as well is that the actual literal truth does not matter here. It's an emotional truth that is reached, where Daniel says his piece and he convinces everyone. It might not be the facts, but it is enough of a truth. People are convinced, even if it's not the full picture.
I mean, human beings are emotional beings, and in this case especially, there really is not that much concrete evidence. There's one kind of witness, and that's about it. And then the person that's suspected of murder is the only one that would have been there if it happened. There's no video camera. There's no, you know, there's like nothing. There's a recording from the day before when the truth is inaccessible and we cannot get to the truth. A trial is not going to get us any further, and we have to rely on what we believe. And in saying that, Leo, I would ask you, do you think that is a favorable or unfavorable depiction of the French legal system, if I'm interpreting the film correctly?
You reached a really, really important point, because it's a favorable picture, because the justice, we will never be able to reach the truth, especially in this case, because, you know, there are a lot of theories, but even in cases where there are a lot of evidences on the shoulders of someone, even in this case, you will not reach the truth. It will always be a perspective. So that's the point of the trial. You're trying to reach the legal truth, the judicial truth. There is a burden of the proof that the prosecutor has to reach to find this person guilty. And we don't care if at the end we didn't reach the truth, but there is no real truth. You know what I mean? There is the truth of the victim. There is the truth of the family of the victim. There is the truth of the person who were there when the crime was committed. There is the truth of the person who committed the crime or didn't commit the crime. That's the thing. That's the point of the justice. We just have to find the judicial truth. Is there enough evidences to convict this person? And I think Justine Triet reached the goal of her film. She succeeded. That's the thing. And I will say maybe why I'm not impressed by the film, because I would say that I'm aware about these problematics and these questions of justice. So maybe that's why I was not shocked or impressed by the film. But I was able at the end to say, yes, okay, she reached the point.
So I want to hear from both of you. What is your belief? What is your verdict at the end? Do you believe that she is guilty or not guilty? Coupable ou non coupable? I apologize.
I'm gonna say, with everything we have in the film, I was already from the beginning, I thought she didn't do it, and then by the end I still think she didn't do it.
Same as Arnaud, honestly. And as you said, I think that's not the point of the film, and this is why it's really great, because at the end we don't care if she did it or not, because all the evidences that were showed in the process, I mean, I think most of the person who saw the film at the end were like, yeah, she didn't commit it.
Part of my problem with some of the film, again, I really like the film overall, but part of my problem with it is that never for a moment do I believe that it's even the tiniest bit possible that she could have done it. There's not even one moment where I doubted that maybe she actually had done it. None of the evidence presented changed my opinion whatsoever. So yeah, I'm all the way not guilty. But like you're saying, it is not the interesting question of the film. There's a lot more interesting questions on this film's
The
mind.
interesting question is, did the dog do it?
Oh shit. No one questioned Snoop.
What the dog doing?
Well, I believe that brings us to the end of this conversation on Anatomy of a Fall. I want to thank you both for coming. Thank you so much, Arnaud, for joining us as always. And Leo, thank you very much for coming in for your very first time on the show. Really appreciate you talking about this movie and giving some of your perspective and answering some of the lingering questions that I have about this movie. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much.
As always, my name is Matt, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.